Abdulhamid II, Ottoman Turkish, Abdülhamid-i Sânî, Turkish, İkinci Abdülhamit. The 22nd of September 1842, the 10th of February 1918, was the 34th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He was the last Sultan to exert effective autocratic control over the Ottoman Empire. He oversaw a period of decline in the power and extent of the empire, including widespread pogroms and government massacres against the minorities of the empire, named the Hamidian massacres after him, as well as an assassination attempt, ruling from the 31st of August 1876 until he was deposed shortly after the Young Turk Revolution on the 27th of April 1909. He was succeeded by his brother Mehmed V. Abdulhamid's deposition was hailed by most Ottoman citizens, who welcomed the return to constitutional rule, which had been suspended for decades after his dissolution of the Ottoman Parliament and Constitution in 1878 had ended the first constitutional era and given him absolute control. Despite his conservatism and belief in absolute monarchy, Abdulhamid was responsible for some modest modernization of the Ottoman Empire during his long reign, including reform of the bureaucracy, the ambitious Hijaz railway project, the establishment of a system for population registration and control over the press, and the founding of the first modern law school in 1898. Between 1871 and 1908, the Sublime Porte thus reached a new degree of organizational elaboration and articulation, although Abdulhamid's attraction to absolutism led him to reduce most of his government ministers to secretaries. He became more reclusive toward the end of his reign, his worsening paranoia about perceived threats to his personal power and for his life leading him to shun public appearances. Abdulhamid II was born in Topkapı Palace in Constantinople, modern Turkey, during Ottoman Empire, on September 21, 1842. He was the son of Sultan Abdülhamid and one of his many wives, the Valide Sultan Tiramujgan, the 16th of August 1819, Constantinople, Feriye Palace, the 3rd of October 1852, originally named Virgin. He later also became the adoptive son of another of his father's wives, Valide Sultan Rahian II. He was a skilled carpenter and personally crafted most of his own furniture, which can be seen today at Yıldız Palace and Bulabi Palace in Istanbul. Abdulhamid II was also interested in opera and personally wrote the first ever Turkish translations of many opera classics. He also composed several opera pieces for the Mezgah which he established, and hosted the famous performers of Europe at the Opera House of Yıldız Palace, which was recently restored and featured in the film Hürriyet, 1999, of the Turkish-Italian director Fertzan Özpetek, which begins with the scene of Abdulhamid II watching a performance. Unlike many other Ottoman sultans, Abdulhamid II traveled to distant countries. 9 years before he took the throne, he accompanied his uncle Sultan Abdulaziz on his visit to Austria, France and Britain in 1867. Accession to throne. He ascended to the throne following the deposition of his brother Murad on the 31st of August 1876. At his accession, some commentators were impressed by the fact that he rode practically unattended to the Eyüp Sultan Mosque where he was given the sword of Osman. Most people expected Abdulhamid II to have liberal ideas, and some conservatives were inclined to regard him with suspicion as a dangerous reformer. He did not plan and express any goal in his accession speech. However, he worked with the young Ottomans to realize some form of constitutional arrangements. This new form in its theoretical space could help to realize a liberal transition with Islamic arguments, which could balance the Tanzimat's imitation of Western norms. The political structure of Western norms did not work with the centuries-old Ottoman political culture, even if the pressure from the Western world was enormous to adapt Western ways of political decision. On the 23rd of December 1876, under the shadow of the 1875 insurrection in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the war with Serbia and Montenegro and the feeling aroused throughout Europe by the cruelty used in stamping out the Bulgarian rebellion, he promulgated the constitution and its parliament. The International Constantinople Conference, which met at Constantinople towards the end of 1876, was surprised by the promulgation of a constitution, but European powers at the conference rejected the constitution as a significant change. They preferred the 1856 constitution, the Hat-Humayun and 1839 Hat-Serif of Gulhane, but questioned whether there was need for a parliament to act as an official voice of the people. In any event, like many other would-be reforms of the Ottoman Empire, change proved to be nearly impossible. Russia continued to mobilize for war. However, everything changed when the British fleet approached the capital from the Sea of Marmara. Early in 1877 the Ottoman Empire went to war with the Russian Empire. Abdulhamid's biggest fear, near dissolution, was realized with the Russian declaration of war on the 24th of April 1877. In that conflict, the Ottoman Empire fought without help from European allies. Russian Chancellor Prince Gorchakov had effectively purchased Austrian neutrality with the Reichsstadt Agreement. The British Empire, though still fearing the Russian threat to British dominance in southern Asia, did not involve itself in the conflict because of public opinion against the Ottomans, following reports of Ottoman brutality in putting down the Bulgarian uprising. The Russian victory was quickly realized. The conflict ended in February 1878. The Treaty of San Stefano, signed at the end of the war, imposed harsh terms. The Ottoman Empire gave independence to Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. It granted autonomy to Bulgaria, instituted reforms in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and ceded parts of Dobrudza to Romania and parts of Armenia to Russia, which was also paid an enormous indemnity. After the war with Russia, Abdulhamid suspended the constitution in February 1878, and he also dismissed the parliament after its solitary meeting in March 1877. For the next near half-century, the Ottoman Empire was ruled by Abdulhamid from Yildiz Palace. As Russia could dominate the newly independent states, her influence in southeastern Europe was greatly increased by the Treaty of San Stefano. Due to the insistence of the great powers, especially the United Kingdom, the treaty was later revised at the Congress of Berlin so as to reduce the great advantages acquired by Russia. In exchange of these favors, Cyprus was rented to Britain in 1878. There were troubles in Egypt, where a discredited Khedive had to be deposed. Abdulhamid mishandled relations with Urabi Pasha, and as a result Great Britain gained virtual control over Egypt and Sudan by sending its troops in 1882 with the pretext of bringing order to those provinces. Cyprus, Egypt and Sudan remained as Ottoman provinces on paper until 1914, when Britain officially annexed those territories in response to the Ottoman participation in World War I on the side of the Central Powers. There were key problems regarding the Albanian question resulting from the Albanian League of Prizren and with the Greek and Montenegrin frontiers, where the European powers were determined that the decisions of the Berlin Congress should be carried into effect. The union in 1885 of Bulgaria with Eastern Rumelia was another blow. The creation of an independent and powerful Bulgaria was viewed as a serious threat to the Ottoman Empire. For many years Abdulhamid had to deal with Bulgaria in a way that did not antagonize either Russian or German wishes. Crete was granted extended privileges, but these did not satisfy the population, which sought unification with Greece. In early 1897, a Greek expedition sailed to Crete to overthrow Ottoman rule on the island. This act was followed by war, in which the Ottoman Empire defeated Greece. See the Greco-Turkish War, 1897. However, as a result of the Treaty of Constantinople, Crete was taken over en depot by the United Kingdom, France, and Russia. Prince George of Greece was appointed as ruler and Crete was effectively lost to the Ottoman Empire. Starting around 1890 the Armenians began demanding the implementation of the reforms which were promised to them at the Berlin Conference. Unrest occurred in 1892 and 1893 at Mersifon and Tokat. Armenian groups staged protests and were met by violence and 300,000 Armenians were killed. Sultan Abdulhamid, referred to as the Bloody Sultan in the West, did not hesitate to put down these revolts with harsh methods, possibly to show the unshakable power of the monarch, and often used the local Muslims, in most cases the Kurds, against the Armenians. In 1907, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation attempted to assassinate him with a car bombing during a public appearance, but the Sultan was delayed for a minute and the bomb went off early. killing 26, wounding 58, of which 4 died at hospital, and demolishing 17 cars in the process. This continued aggression, along with the handling of the Armenian desire for reforms, led to the Western European powers taking a more hands-on approach with the Turks. The Triple Entente, that is, the United Kingdom, France and Russia, maintained strained relations with the Ottoman Empire. Abdulhamid and his close advisers believed the empire should be treated as an equal player by these great powers. In the Sultan's view, the Ottoman Empire was a European empire, distinct for having more Muslims than Christians. Abdulhamid and his divan viewed themselves as modern. However, their actions were often construed by Europeans as exotic or uncivilized. Over time, their perceived aggression by France, the occupation of Tunisia in 1881, and Great Britain, the 1882 power grab in Egypt, caused Abdulhamid to gravitate towards Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II was twice hosted by Abdulhamid in Constantinople, first on the 21st of October 1889, and 9 years later, on the 5th of October 1898. Wilhelm II later visited Constantinople for a third time, on the 15th of October 1917, as a guest of Mehmed V. German officers, like Baron von der Goltz and Bodo Boris von Dittfurth, were employed to oversee the organization of the Ottoman army. German government officials were brought in to reorganize the Ottoman government's finances. Abdulhamid tried to take more of the reins of power into his own hands, for he distrusted his ministers. Germany's friendship was not altruistic, it had to be fostered with railway and loan concessions. In 1899, a significant German desire, the construction of a Berlin-Baghdad railway, was granted. Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany also requested the Sultan's help when having trouble with Chinese Muslim troops. During the Boxer Rebellion, the Chinese Muslim Kansu braves fought against the German army repeatedly, routing them, along with the other 8-nation alliance forces during the Sima expedition in 1900. It was only on the second attempt, that is, the Gassali expedition, that the alliance forces managed to get through to battle the Chinese Muslim troops at the Battle of Peking. Kaiser Wilhelm was so alarmed by the Chinese Muslim troops that he requested that Abdulhamid find a way to stop the Muslim troops from fighting. Abdulhamid agreed to the Kaiser's demands and sent Enver Pasha to China in 1901, but the rebellion was over by that time. The national humiliation of the situation in Macedonia, together with the resentment in the army against the palace spies and informers, at last brought matters to a crisis. In the summer of 1908 the Young Turk Revolution broke out and Abdulhamid, upon learning that the troops in Salonika were marching on Constantinople, 23 July, at once capitulated. On 24 July an raid announced the restoration of the suspended constitution of 1876. The next day, further raids abolished espionage and censorship, and ordered the release of political prisoners. On 17 December, Abdulhamid opened the Turkish parliament with a speech from the throne in which he said that the first parliament had been temporarily dissolved until the education of the people had been brought to a sufficiently high level by the extension of instruction throughout the empire. The new attitude of the Sultan did not save him from the suspicion of intriguing with the powerful reactionary elements in the state, a suspicion confirmed by his attitude towards the counter-revolution of the 13th of April 1909 known as 31 Mart Vackers, when an insurrection of the soldiers backed by a conservative public upheaval in the capital overthrew the cabinet. The government, restored by soldiers from Salonika, decided on Abdulhamid's deposition, and on 27 April his brother Rishad Effendi was proclaimed as Sultan Mehmed V. The Sultan's counter-coup, which had appealed to conservative Islamists in the context of the Young Turks' liberal reforms, resulted in the massacre of tens of thousands of Christian Armenians in the Adana province. The ex-Sultan was conveyed into dignified captivity at Salonika. In 1912, when Salonika fell to Greece, he was returned to captivity in Constantinople. He spent his last days studying, carpentering and writing his memoirs in custody at Bilibi Palace in the Bosphorus, where he died on the 10th of February 1918, just a few months before his brother, the Sultan. He was buried in Constantinople, Abdulhamid was the last relatively authoritative sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He presided over 33 years of decline. The Ottoman Empire had long been acknowledged as the sick man of Europe by its enemies. The British, French and most European countries excluding Germany, Bulgaria and Austria-Hungary. Ideology and progress paranoia. Abdulhamid was paranoid about his security. The memory of the deposition of Abdulaziz I was on his mind and convinced him that a constitutional government was not a good idea. Because of this, information was tightly controlled and the press was tightly censored. The curriculum of schools was subject to close inspection to prevent dissidents. Ironically, the schools that Abdulhamid tried to control became breeding grounds of discontent as students and teachers alike chafed at the clumsy restrictions of the censors. Abdulhamid's reign also had a fully functioning state spy system. These spies greatly impeded the operation of the state administration because officials were always concerned that a false report would be filed against them. In Spies, Scandals and Sultans, by Ibrahim al-Muwallih, it is recounted how spies were operating all across Constantinople and that Sheikh al-Islam was paralyzed with fear of these spies. Additionally, al-Muwallih described how many spies follow the carriage of the crown prince. Overall, these spies hampered the functioning of the state and their presence undoubtedly stifled many creative impulses because people were afraid of being reported. As he got older, Abdulhamid became increasingly isolated and paranoid. He was afraid of having any organization or individual impinge on his level of power. In response to this fear, he started to underfund the army and this sparked the Third Army Revolt in 1908. Most people expected Abdulhamid II to have liberal ideas, and some conservatives were inclined to regard him with suspicion as a dangerous reformer. In the event, like many other would-be reformers of the Ottoman Empire, change proved to be nearly impossible. Default in the public funds, an empty treasury, the 1875 insurrection in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the war with Serbia and Montenegro and the feeling aroused throughout Europe by the cruelty used in stamping out the Bulgarian rebellion all proved good reasons not to undertake any significant changes. There were many setbacks. Financial embarrassments forced him to consent to a foreign control over the national debt. In a decree issued in December 1881, a large portion of the empire's revenues were handed over to the public debt administration for the benefit of, mostly foreign, bondholders. Over the years Abdulhamid succeeded in reducing his ministers to the position of secretaries, and he concentrated much of the administration of the empire into his own hands at his palace. But internal dissension was not reduced. Crete was constantly in turmoil. The Greeks living within the Ottoman Empire's borders were dissatisfied, as were the Armenians. His distrust for the reformist admirals of the Ottoman navy, whom he suspected of plotting against him and trying to bring back the 1876 constitution, and his subsequent decision to lock the Ottoman fleet, which ranked as the third largest fleet in the world during the reign of his predecessor Abdulaziz, inside the Golden Horn caused the loss of Ottoman overseas territories and islands in North Africa, the Mediterranean Sea and the Aegean Sea during and after his reign. His push for education resulted in the establishment of 18 professional schools, and in 1900, Darul Fünun aka, the University of Istanbul, was established. He also created a large system of secondary, primary, and military schools throughout the empire. 51 secondary schools were constructed in a 12-year period, 1882 to 1894. As the goal of the educational reforms in the Hamidian era were to counter foreign influence, these secondary schools utilized European teaching techniques, yet instilled within students a strong sense of Ottoman identity, Islamic morality, and loyalty to the Sultan. The primary goal of these educational reforms was to Ottomanize the education system and thereby the student citizenry. He reorganized the Ministry of Justice, and developed the rail and telegraph systems. The telegraph system expanded to incorporate the furthest parts of empire. Railways connected Istanbul and Vienna by 1883, and shortly after the Orient Express connected Paris to Istanbul. During his rule, Railways within the Ottoman Empire expanded to connect Ottoman-controlled Europe and Anatolia with Istanbul as well. This increased ability to travel and communicate within the Ottoman Empire served to strengthen the influence Istanbul had over the rest of the empire. Abdülhamid recognized that the ideas of Tanzimat could not bring the disparate peoples of the empire to a common identity, such as Ottomanism. Abdülhamid tried to formulate a new and more relevant ideological principle. Ottoman sultans beginning with 1517 were also caliphs. He wanted to promote that fact and emphasize the Ottoman Caliphate. Abdülhamid usually resisted the pressure of the European powers to the last moment, in order to seem to yield only to overwhelming force and to appear as the champion of Islam against aggressive Christendom. Pan-Islamism was encouraged. The privileges of foreigners in the Ottoman Empire, which were often seen as an obstacle to effective government, were curtailed. Along with the strategically important Constantinople-Baghdad Railway, the Constantinople-Medina Railway was also completed, making the trip to Hajj more efficient. Emissaries were sent to distant countries preaching Islam and the Caliph's supremacy. During his rule, Abdülhamid refused Theodor Herzl's offers to pay down a substantial portion of the Ottoman debt, £150 million in gold, in exchange for a charter allowing the Zionists to settle in Palestine. Abdülhamid's appeals to Muslim sentiment were not very effective due to widespread disaffection within his empire. In Mesopotamia and Yemen disturbance was endemic. Nearer home, a semblance of loyalty was maintained in the army and among the Muslim population only by a system of deflation and espionage. After his rule began, Abdülhamid became fearful of being assassinated and withdrew himself into the fortified seclusion of the Quds Palace. Pictures from Empire. Abdülhamid commissioned thousands of photographs of his empire. Fearful of assassination, he did not travel often, though still more than many previous rulers, and photographs provided visual evidence of what was taking place in his realm. The Sultan presented large gift albums of photographs to various governments and heads of state, including the United States. William Allen, The Abdulhamid II Collection, History of Photography 8, 1984, 119-45, and Great Britain, M.I. Wayland British Library, Sultan Abdulhamid II Early Turkish Photographs in 51 albums from the British Library on microfiche, Zug, Switzerland, IDC, 1987. The American collection is housed in the Library of Congress and has been digitized. Abdulhamid II was born at Sragan Palace, Ortaköy, or at Topkapı Palace, both in Constantinople, the son of Sultan Abdülhamid I and one of his many wives, Turay Mujgan Sultan, Yerevan, the 16th of August 1819, Constantinople, Feriye Palace, the 2nd of November 1853, originally named Virgin, an Armenian, but some says she was a Circassian. He later also became the adoptive son of another of his father's wives, Valide Sultan Rahim Perest II. He was a skilled carpenter and personally crafted most of his own furniture, which can be seen today at Quds Palace and Bulabi Palace in Constantinople. Abdülhamid II was also interested in opera and personally wrote the first ever Turkish translations of many opera classics. He also composed several opera pieces for the Mzka which he established, and hosted the famous performers of Europe at the Opera House of Quds Palace, which was recently restored and featured in the film Harim's Heir, 1999, of the Turkish-Italian director Fertzan Özpetek, which begins with the scene of Abdülhamid II watching a performance. In the opinion of F. A. K. Yasami, he was a striking amalgam of determination and timidity, of insight and fantasy, held together by immense practical caution and an instinct for the fundamentals of power. He was frequently underestimated. Judged on his record, he was a formidable domestic politician and an effective diplomat. He was also a good wrestler of Yaglogyias and a patron saint of the wrestlers. He organized wrestling tournaments in the empire and selected wrestlers were invited to the palace. Abdülhamid personally tried the sportsmen and good ones remained in the palace. Sultan Abdülhamid II was a practitioner of traditional Islamic spirituality, or Sufism, of the Shadili Tariqa. He was a disciple of the Libyan Shadili Madani Sheikh, Muhammad Zafir al-Madani, whose lessons he would attend in disguise in Ankapani before he became Sultan. Abdulhamid II asked Sheikh al-Madani to return to Istanbul after he ascended the throne. The Sheikh initiated Shadali gatherings of remembrance, dhikr, in the newly commissioned Yildiz Hamidi Mosque. He also became a close religious and political confidant of the Sultan. In 1879 the Sultan excused the taxes of all of the Caliphate's Madani Sufi lodges, also known as Zawiyyas and Tex. In 1888, he even established a Sufi lodge for the Madani order of Shadili Sufism in Istanbul, which he commissioned as part of the Ertuğrul Tek Mosque. The relationship of the Sultan and the Sheikh lasted for 30 years until the latter's death in 1903. Abdulhamid was also a poet just like many other Ottoman sultans. One of the Sultan's poems translates thus: "My lord, I know you are the dear one, Al-Aziz. And no one but you are the dear one, you are the one, and nothing else. My God, take my hand in these hard times. My God, be my helper in this critical hour." He was extremely fond of Sherlock Holmes novels.